Imagine waking up one day and realizing that pain no longer shocks you. Not because life suddenly became gentle, but because you've learned, slowly and quietly, how to absorb impact without reacting. Things that would once have broken you now pass through you like distant weather. You still notice them. You just don't feel them in the same way. People often misunderstand this state. They call it strength, resilience, maturity. They admire how calm you remain under pressure, how composed you are in chaos, how little seems to rattle you. They say things like, after everything you've been through, nothing can hurt you anymore. But that compliment hides a disturbing question. What if what looks like strength is actually exhaustion? What if calm is not peace but the silence that comes after too much noise? And what if the mind, after enduring too much trauma, doesn't heal in the way we imagine but adapts in ways that quietly change who you are? There is a paradox at the center of trauma that few people talk about. Trauma does not always leave people fragile and visibly broken. Sometimes it does the opposite. It creates individuals who are hyperfunctional, controlled, self-sufficient, emotionally restrained, people who can survive almost anything but struggle to feel deeply connected to life afterward. You become reliable. Others lean on you. You're the one who keeps going when things fall apart. And yet, somewhere beneath that competence, something feels muted. Joy doesn't arrive easily. Rest never feels complete. Closeness feels complicated. You may even begin to wonder whether this numbness is just who you are now. And here, as the unsettling part, people who have endured too much trauma often don't identify as traumatized at all. They don't see themselves as victims. They see themselves as realistic, hardened by experience, aware of how the world really works. They tell themselves stories that make sense. I've just learned not to expect too much. I don't get attached easily anymore. I've been through worse. This doesn't matter. But what if those stories are not wisdom, but survival strategies that never got switched off? What if the mind, after being overwhelmed too many times, decides that the safest way to live is not to hope too much, fail too much, or trust too deeply? And if that's true, then a more uncomfortable question follows. When does endurance stop being resilience and start becoming a quiet form of self-erasure? Because surviving trauma is not the same as recovering from it, and the psychology of people who have endured too much pain is far more complex and far more misunderstood than most people realize. To understand it, you have to look beneath behavior, beneath coping, beneath the stories people tell themselves about how strong they are. You have to look at how the mind changes when pain stops being an event and becomes a pattern. The hidden problem does not begin with trauma itself. It begins with what the mind learns to do after trauma. The human psyche is adaptive by nature. When pain appears once, the mind reacts. But when pain repeats without relief, without safety, the mind stops reacting and starts reorganizing. Not to heal, to endure. Carl Jung believed that the psyche does not destroy what it cannot bear. It boris, Italiano. And buried parts do not disappear. They go quiet. They retreat into the background and continue to influence behavior from the shadows. This is why people who have endured too much trauma often don't feel broken. They feel contained, controlled, emotionally regulated to a degree that others admire. The chaos didn't destroy them, it taught them how to suppress its impact. Over time, the psyche makes an internal adjustment. Feeling deeply becomes inefficient. Hope becomes risky. Vulnerability becomes unnecessary. So the mind lowers the intensity of experience itself. This is not fear. It is economy. The nervous system, when exposed to prolonged stress, learns that constant emotional engagement is unsustainable. To preserve functioning, it sacrifices sensitivity. What remains is alertness without openness, stability without softness. From the outside, this looks like resilience. From the inside, it feels like distance. Jung warned that when parts of the self are pushed away for too long, the personality becomes one-sided. The person survives, but at the cost of inner wholeness. Emotional range narrows, spontaneity fades. Life becomes something to manage rather than inhabit. This is how trauma reshapes identity without announcing itself. You become capable, responsible, independent. You learn how to stay composed under pressure and calm in situations that overwhelm others. But that composure comes with an unspoken rule. Don't feel more than you can control. And because this rule works, it keeps you functional, it stops being questioned. It hardens into habit, then into character, eventually into identity. You don't think, I adapted to survive. You think, this is just who I am. But what Jung understood and what Runa often hides is that adaptation is not the same as integration. Survival strategies are meant to be temporary. When they become permanent, they quietly limit who you are allowed to be. And that is where the consequences begin, not as collapse, but as subtle distortions in how you relate to yourself, to others, and to life itself. The most damaging effects of enduring too much trauma are not loud. They don't look like breakdowns or obvious dysfunction. They appear as adjustments, small, reasonable shifts that slowly reshape how you experience the world. Strong reactions feel unnecessary. Joy arrives briefly, then fades. Sadness feels distant, manageable, contained. Your inner life becomes quieter, flatter, more predictable. This is not because you lack emotion. It's because your mind learned that intensity is expensive. Psychologically, this creates a subtle form of emotional minimalism. You begin choosing what feels safest, not what feels most alive. You lower expectations not consciously, but instinctively. Not because you are pessimistic, but because disappointment has been too costly in the past. Another consequence appears in relationships. Closeness begins to feel complicated, not threatening, but effortful. You may find yourself listening more than sharing, supporting others without letting them see you, being present while remaining guarded. You value independence, not as a preference, but as a necessity. Without realizing it, you become hard to reach emotionally. Cognitive psychology helps explain why. The brain is shaped by repeated experience. When openness has historically led to pain, the nervous system associates connection with risk. Over time, it learns to stay regulated by staying slightly detached. So you appear calm, reliable, unshakable. But inside, something narrows. Thoughts begin to loop inward. You analyze instead of feel. You anticipate instead of hope. You observe yourself constantly, monitoring reactions, keeping everything under control. This self-surveillance feels normal, responsible, even mature. Yet it comes at a cost. When emotional range shrinks, meaning does too. Experiences lose contrast. Days blur together. Time feels faster, not because life is exciting, but because nothing fully lands. Conversations that stay on the surface even when you want depth. And because this state is functional, because you still perform, still cope, still survive it, rarely gets questioned. Society reinforces it. You are praised for being strong, for not needing much, for handling things well. But adaptation has a limit. What trauma quietly teaches is not just how to endure pain, but how to live with less emotion, less risk, less vulnerability, less self. And eventually, a strange discomfort emerges. Not suffering, but a sense that something essential has gone unused for too long. That quiet realization is what creates the turning point. The moment when survival is no longer enough. Breaking free from trauma does not begin with revisiting the past. That assumption keeps many people stuck. The rebellion begins with something far quieter and far more unsettling. Questioning the rules your mind learned while trying to survive. Rules like, stay in control. Don't need too much. Don't expect safety. These rules once protected you. But protection, when left unquestioned, becomes a cage. The first shift is recognizing that numbness is not neutrality, it is containment. It is the nervous system holding everything tightly to prevent overwhelm. And anything held too tightly for too long eventually loses flexibility. So the rebellion is not about forcing yourself to feel more. It is about allowing small, intentional risks in places you have learned to stay guarded. Not dramatic vulnerability, not emotional collapse, but moments of controlled openness, letting a reaction exist without immediately regulating it. staying present in a conversation instead of retreating internally, allowing disappointment to register instead of explaining it away. These acts feel inefficient. That's the point. Trauma-trained minds equate efficiency with safety, but life is not meant to be efficient. It is meant to be felt. Another shift involves redefining strength. Trauma teaches you that strength means endurance, how much you can carry without breaking. But real strength also includes permeability. The ability to be affected without losing yourself. This is where many people hesitate. Because being affected feels like danger, like regression, like losing control. But control was never healing. It was survival. Breaking free means letting go of the fantasy that you must remain intact at all costs. It means choosing engagement over distance, presence over self-monitoring. Not all at once, but deliberately. The rebellion is subtle. No one applauds it. No one notices it immediately. But over time, something changes. Life begins to press back. Moments gain weight. Connections deepen. And slowly, the nervous system relearns a truth it forgot. That feeling does not always lead to harm. Sometimes, it leads back to yourself. The deepest truth about enduring too much trauma is not that it breaks you. It reshapes you, not into someone weaker, but into someone smaller, more contained, more controlled than you were meant to be. Trauma does not always destroy the self. More often, it constrains it. It teaches you how to exist within narrow emotional limits, where nothing overwhelms but nothing fully nourishes either. This is the realization that changes everything. Survival is not the same as living. You are never meant to be permanently guarded. The strategies that once kept you alive were designed for a dangerous chapter, not for an entire lifetime. When they remain in place too long, they don't protect you anymore. They quietly prevent you from becoming whole. Enduring trauma trains you to value stability over truth, control over connection, safety over depth. And for a long time, that trade feels reasonable, necessary, even until one day you notice the cost. Not as pain, but as absence. An absence of spontaneity, of emotional richness, of feeling fully present inside your own life. The ultimate realization is this. Healing is not about returning to who you were before trauma. That person no longer exists. Healing is about expanding beyond who survival required you to become. Not by forcing emotion, not by reliving pain, but by allowing yourself to be affected again gradually, consciously, without apology. Trauma taught you to endure the world. Now, the work is learning how to re-enter it. And once you see that difference clearly, you can no longer mistake numbness for peace, or survival for freedom.